Are you ready to take your deployment to the next level? This video is the second one in a series on using the AWS CDK to build and deploy a CI/CD pipeline. The CI/CD pipeline will deploy your AWS infrastructure as well as a front-end web application. In this video, we're going to supercharge our pipeline by adding a front-end build, deploying it to S3, and setting up a CloudFront distribution with an SSL certificate for secure, blazing fast content delivery. Plus, we'll configure a Route 53 hosted zone so that we can use a custom domain name. Get ready to see how easy it is to deploy a full-stack web application using AWS and the CDK. Let's jump in. All right, so welcome back to part two. We're just going to really quickly recap what we did in part one and then show how we're going to modify the pipeline to include a view application that's going to get built and then deployed to S3, as well as a couple other components. All right, let's check it out. So if you remember here in part one, we just built a really simple pipeline that was capable of pulling from a GitHub repository and then deploying just a simple S3 bucket using the CDK. Well, now we're going to modify things a little bit. So in blue here, I've highlighted what we're going to do in this tutorial. And to just go over it really briefly, we're basically going to add a second GitHub repository that's just going to be a view application. We're going to add a front-end bucket that's going to host our view application, a CloudFront distribution, a Route 53 hosted zone, and a certificate manager SSL certificate so that we can use a custom domain name. We're also going to add a build stage in between the source and the deploy stage. The build stage is simply just going to build our view application. And then to the deploy stage, we're going to add one more action that's going to deploy our website to the S3 bucket. And we'll allow the CloudFront distribution to then host our content. So let's jump into the code and get started. All right, so here's our pipeline project from our first video. The first context variable we're going to add is the front-end repo name, and in this case, it's just view-app. If you want to download this repo, I have it in my GitHub, and it's literally just a view app that I initialized. I didn't do anything to it. And we can actually hop here over to my GitHub, and we'll just go ahead and copy this link. We'll hop back into the code, and we'll git clone this repository. We can cd into the view app. We can just npm I, and then we can just run npm run dev. And we'll just jump over into the browser and we can see here just on localhost where we have this really basic view application. This is what we're going to deploy to our S3 bucket. So jumping back into the code here, we'll cd out of this and we'll cd back into our CI/CD pipeline folder. The next context variable we're going to add is domain. For this, I just registered modernserverless.io with GoDaddy. So that's the one I'm going to use for this. Next, inside of our dev object, we're just going to add subdomain and we're going to set that equal to dev period. And we're also going to add a front-end branch name and we're going to call that dev. For prod, our subdomain is actually just going to be an empty string because we're actually going to use the root level domain here to host our production version of our website, whereas our development version will be hosted at dev.modernserverless.io. And our front-end branch name is going to be main. Let's jump on over to our pipeline. Inside the pipeline, we're just going to import two of our new variables, our front-end repository name and our domain name. And then of course, we're just going to pass both of those into the env object that's going to get passed into the pipeline stack. Now we'll jump here into our pipeline stack. Into our pipeline stack props, we're going to enable the ability to bring in the front-end repo name and the front-end branch name, as well as domain and subdomain. All right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to build our front-end source bucket. This is the bucket that our pipeline is going to build and then deploy all of the view artifacts into. And then we're going to point our CloudFront distribution to use this S3 bucket as its origin. So we'll do const front-end bucket equals a new bucket. We'll pass in this, we'll call it front-end bucket. And then here we're going to pass in the exact same props. We're going to give it a bucket name. We'll just call it the front-end source bucket using the env name, just like we did for the artifact bucket. We'll do removal policy of destroy, and we will auto delete objects to true, just in case we want to delete the pipeline. Next, we'll define our domain name. Domain name is just going to be a concatenation of subdomain and domain. Again, if it's prod, this is just going to be an empty string, so it'll just use the domain name. Else it'll use whatever dot the domain name. Next, we'll create our hosted zone here, and we'll set that equal to a new hosted zone. Pass in this, call it hosted zone. Then we'll just set zone name to be equal to our concatenated domain name. Next, we're going to create our SSL certificate for our custom domain name. Const certificate is equal to a new certificate. And make sure you import the right certificate. It is the ACM certificate here, not the one from the crypto library. This, we'll call it SSL cert. For props, we'll just pass in domain name. And the only other attribute we need is validation. Validation is just going to be set to certificate validation dot from DNS. And then here we're just going to pass in our hosted zone. Now to get this certificate to validate, we are going to need to do one manual step when we go to deploy it the first time. We're going to need to change the name servers of wherever our domain is hosted. In this case, it's GoDaddy, to whatever name servers are assigned to our hosted zone when we create it. It's pretty simple, but we'll walk through it in this tutorial a little bit later. So next, we're actually going to restrict bucket access so that our website has to be accessed through the CloudFront distribution and cannot be accessed directly from S3. So we'll create an origin access identity here. We'll set that equal to a new origin access identity. We'll pass in this, and then we'll just call it origin access identity. And then next, we're just going to take our front end bucket and we're going to type .grant read and then pass in our origin access identity. All right, next, let's actually create our CloudFront distribution. So distribution is going to be equal to a new distribution from CloudFront. We'll pass in this, we'll call it front end distribution. And then for the props, we have to pass in default root object. And we'll just set that to index.html. Next, we're going to set default behavior. That'll be equal to an object where we will then define origin. Origin will just be a new S3 origin, of course, because we're serving our website from S3. We'll pass in the front end bucket. And then we're also going to pass in as props to the S3 origin, our origin access identity. And this effectively finalizes the restricting of the bucket to only be accessible via CloudFront. Finally, after the default behavior, we're going to also set viewer protocol policy, and that will just be set to viewer protocol policy dot redirect to HTTPS. This will just force all requests to use HTTPS. Next, after the default behavior, we'll set our domain names. Domain names is just an array, but the only object that will be in that array will be our single domain name. And then we're also going to pass in our certificate. Next, we're going to create an A record in our new hosted zone. This will ensure that traffic that goes to our domain gets served what's in the CloudFront distribution. So we'll set this equal to a new A record. Pass in this, we'll just call it A record. We'll pass in the zone as our hosted zone. And then the target will just be set to record target dot from alias, where we're then going to pass in a new CloudFront target, where we'll then pass in our distribution. All right, so let's get to altering this pipeline now so that everything gets deployed correctly. First, we'll create our output of the front end source because remember, we're going to add this GitHub repository to our source stage. So this will just be a new artifact and we'll just call it front end source output. Next, we're going to create our front end build project. So we'll just say const front end build project equals a new pipeline project. We'll pass in this. For the resource name, we'll just call it front end build project. Then next we'll pass in these props. So there will be just a couple different things here than our infrastructure build project. The first thing we'll pass in is the build environment, be set to an object. We'll set the build image to a Linux build image and Amazon Linux 2.5. The reason we're using this is because we're going to need access to node 20 in order to build our Vue project. For some reason, if you don't specify this, code build actually defaults to like node 10 or something that's not even in use anymore. Next, we'll declare our build spec. Of course, we'll set that equal to build spec dot from object, where we'll then pass in the build spec object. Again, we'll set version to 0.2, and then we'll just set our only command here to be npm install. Our next stage will just be build. Build, I'm just going to set building front end here, and then I'm going to have it do npm run build, which is going to compile everything into JavaScript and then give us an artifact that we can upload to S3. All right, that should be our last phase. Now we're going to set artifacts, and we're going to tell it that we want all of the files inside of the dist directory. Finally, just a little bit of optimization here. We're going to add a cache, and in the cache, we're going to set paths equal to an array, and we're just going to set it to node modules. This will just speed up our build time so we don't have to install the dependencies every single time the pipeline builds, assuming that none of our dependencies are changing between each of our builds. Then finally, after build spec, we're going to specify the cache behavior. So we'll set this equal to cache, so we'll import from codebuild.local. Then we'll pass in something called local cache mode from codebuild.custom. And this just configures the cache to be able to store the node modules locally and then be able to pull from it on subsequent builds. All right, so now let's go down into our pipeline and we'll add these new actions. So we'll just copy this GitHub source. We'll change repo to front end repo name. The action name will just change to front end source. We'll change branch to front end branch name, and we'll change output to front end source output. And we can leave the GitHub token because it's all coming from the same GitHub account. So let's declare our build stage now. In between our source stage and our deploy stage, we'll add a stage. Stage name is of course build. Actions, we just set to an array. And in action, we just have one action here, and this will be a new code build action. We'll pass in an object. We'll set action name to build front end. We'll set project to our front end build project that we declared earlier with our build spec. We'll have the input be the front end source output. And then outputs here is going to be an array. We actually forgot a step here now that I'm thinking about it. We need to declare our build stage to have an output so that we can have an artifact to then pass into our deploy stage. So we'll do const, set it to front end build output equals a new artifact, which we'll set just to front end build output. And then here in our outputs array, we can put our front end build output. Great. So now we have an output from this stage that we can then put into our final stage of deploy. So here in deploy, we'll declare a new action and we'll just call a new S3 deploy action since we're deploying to S3. Pass in an object. The first attribute of action name will just be deploy front end. Next, we need to specify our bucket. Of course, it's going to be our front end bucket. Our input will be the output from the previous stage. And then finally, we're going to set extract to true. This will make sure that it pulls everything out of that dist directory and puts it into the root of the S3 bucket so that the CloudFront distribution can find find that index.html and then serve it. So that completes the pipeline. We're going to deploy it here in a second, but if you're finding value from this, please don't forget to like the video, and please let me know down in the comments if you have any questions on this or you need help with something, or if there's just any other videos that you want to see me make on this channel. So now we're going to go ahead and deploy this. We'll do CDK deploy -- profile cloudmancer. If you don't know what profiles are, you can check out this video that I did on it a few weeks ago. And then we're going to do -- context env of prod. The reason we're doing prod first is because it's going to create the root domain hosted zone that's going to have some name servers attached to it. Those name servers we're going to take into GoDaddy, and then we're going to change our name servers in our GoDaddy backend DNS to then point to AWS, and then will allow us to use our AWS hosted zones to manage all of our DNS for all of our domains and subdomains. So let's do that now. We'll hit yes. Now this deployment is going to take a while. CloudFront usually takes at least 5 minutes in and of itself to spin up a new distribution, but the SSL certificate that we're going to make also is going to take a little bit of time, but you have to remember that it will not verify until you have changed the name servers in the correct way, like we're about to do right now. So we can see right here that the hosted zone is being created. That means our name servers are now available. So let's hop into the console and go check them out. We'll head over here to Route 53, and we can see that we have a new hosted zone created for modernserverless.io. We'll hop in there. We'll go to hosted zone details, and we can see all of our name servers here. We're just going to copy these. Next, we're just going to hop into my GoDaddy account here. We'll scroll all the way to the bottom, and we can see this modernserverless.io. We'll click on DNS, and we're going to click on change name servers. Unfortunately, you have to put them all in one by one. All right, those look correct. We'll just hit save. All right, we just had to do some two-step verification in order to do this. Perfect, and it'll say our request is in progress. If we refresh the page, we can now see that our new name servers are listed here as the same ones on our hosted zone. If we hop back into the code here, we can see that the certificate manager certificate is being created. This should now properly verify because we've set up those name servers in GoDaddy to point to our hosted zone. Once this verifies, it should take another couple minutes. It'll begin the CloudFront distribution creation, which will probably take about 5 minutes. So we'll just come back when this is all finished. And one more thing too, this should be the only time that we need to do this. Subsequent deployments, if we needed to make changes to the pipeline, shouldn't take this long. It's usually just the CloudFront distribution's creation that takes the longest. And unless our domain name changes, the certificate won't need to recreate either. All right, so while that certificate and distribution are building, I actually just went ahead and opened up the View app that we cloned here, and then we're just going to make a couple of changes. These changes are just to illustrate that we do have different branches that are deploying to our different websites. So here we're on main. We'll just type this is the main branch here in our hello world message on the main view page. All right, and then we'll push that to the main branch. We'll check out dev, and then we will push that to the dev branch. All right, so our certificate finally issued. We can see here in the console that we had a certificate issued for modernserverless.io. I don't know what took so long, but that took over 20 minutes to issue the certificate. It usually doesn't take that long, but it was probably because this was the first time that we were updating the name servers from GoDaddy name servers to AWS name servers. So just be aware that it can take some time for this certificate to issue. And now we're creating the front-end distribution for CloudFront. So it should be just a few more minutes. Honestly, it's taken so long, I need a snack. And it looks like we finally finished. Wow, that took a really long time. We can refresh here and we can see that our prod CI pipeline stack was updated. We can hop over here to our Route 53 hosted zone, and we can see that we now have an A record for modernserverless.io that is now pointing to our new CloudFront distribution here. And then if we hop over to our pipeline, we can see the prod CI pipeline here. And it looks like the execution actually happened about 15 minutes ago. We can see that we have our now front end source and our infrastructure source. We now have our build front end project, and we can take a look at that here. We can scroll down here. We can see that it's using Node 20. Install phase succeeded. It went into the pre-build, then it ran npm install. Entering stage build that just ran the command npm run build. Created all these assets here. Hopping over here into deploy, we can see our new deploy front end. And if we look at our buckets here, we can see that we had a new bucket created for the front end source. And if we go over here to modernserverless.io, we can see that this is the main branch, and we can see that it pulled from the correct place. Great, so now we're going to do the same thing with the dev pipeline. And just like with the prod pipeline, with the name servers, we're going to have to go into our hosted zone and create a name server record that will point to the new dev.modernserverless.io. All right, we can see that our hosted zone is being created. We'll hop into Route 53, and we'll check out dev.modernserverless.io, a new hosted zone. Open up hosted zone details. And we will copy these name servers here. And now, because we've pointed our GoDaddy name servers of our domain to Route 53, we can now manage all of our DNS through our main hosted zone here. So we'll open this up and we'll go to create record. For the subdomain of dev.modernserverless.io, we're going to select a name server record type, and then we're just going to paste those name servers from the other hosted zone. We now have those name server records listed here in Route 53. Nice, and we can see that our pipeline has actually already been updated, although nothing has executed yet because we haven't pushed anything to dev while this has been running. We're just going to push another change to our dev branch of our Vue app. Cool, we've now pushed that to the dev branch. Then we can hop here into our CI pipeline for dev, and we can see that just now it pulled that new change that we just pushed to the front end. And now it's building our Vue app. And if we jump back into Certificate Manager, we can see that our certificate was issued. We can see here that our CloudFront distribution is being created now. All right, we're all finished. We'll hop over here to dev.modernserverless, and we can see that this is the dev branch. I hope you enjoyed this video. This is a little bit longer one that I've done, but I want to start making more videos on how to build like specific architectures and things like that. So if you guys have any ideas or any videos that you really want to see me make on this channel, please let me know down in the comments. Please don't forget to like the video. Thank you for watching.